Russ Miller. He lives in Arizona, and he's been speaking on topics of creation versus evolution for about 25 years. And he's got a book that he wrote. He actually wrote a number of books, but he's got a book on his table there, and he's got some memory sticks with some of his talks on there, and some slides and all that, and he'll talk about this. But the topic today is the 10 top frauds in the Darwinian frauds in your public school textbooks. You know, what do they say about creation versus evolution? They're not telling the truth, and Russ will get into that. So, Russ, come on up.
Thank you, Heinz. How are you tonight? Awesome. Well, I appreciate you giving up your Friday night to be here tonight, and I do hope and pray that the information I share will be eye-opening and faith-strengthening. The message I'm about to give did cause one college to launch an accredited course attacking me in biblical creation after I gave it in one of their auditoriums, and a biology teacher, as a result, quit her job, saying I'd never teach Darwinian evolution again, and became a Christian, and ended up teaching a class, getting a job in a Christian school teaching science. Because real science is your best friend as a Christian, and that's one of the things I want to show you tonight. The other thing I want to define tonight is to get you to understand the difference between real science, operational science, and historical science, which isn't science at all. And half of everything you've ever heard is science is historical science. So I'm going to define that, and once I do, it only takes 2 minutes. It's going to really be eye-opening. I want you to understand the difference between biblically correct micro change and never seen Darwinian macro change, and a few other neat items. So I'm going to go ahead and get into this. I will mention that I've led Grand Canyon tours from a biblical creation standpoint for about 24 years. I used to take about 1,000 people a year on tours to Grand Canyon, usually in groups of about 50. I used to lead river raft trips through the Grand Canyon based on biblical creation. I've rafted the entire length of the canyon 13 times, some sections 100 times. So I've got a lot of experience around Grand Canyon, and it is one of what I call the 6 pillars of old earth beliefs. And we can recapture Grand Canyon. If I had you on the rim of the canyon, it would take me 2 minutes to get you to realize, wow, nothing but a global flood can explain some of the things we can show you there. So maybe later on I'll get a minute I can explain a couple of those things, but I want to go ahead and get right into this as soon as we are ready to go. It's not here, but let me see. It could have gone to sleep, but that's not on my computer right there. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Or we can just talk about President Trump for a while. Okay. He should go on a Grand Canyon tour with me, you know that? Tell you what, I'll shut my end down and just restart it, okay? Maybe that'll help. That was, oh wait, oh, and I just clicked on it. Okay, looks like we're good to go. Okay, I'll just go ahead and start while it's working. There we go. You know, the Bible tells us, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Now realize, this doesn't mean someone is stupid. I know brilliant people that have been fooled into believing Darwinian evolution and millions of years beliefs. They're not stupid, they've just been fooled. We can all be fooled, and they changed the glory of the uncorruptible God, which I think today is his creation, into an image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. I think they're going to change creation into the fairy tale of Darwinian evolution that lets you think you're the most evolved, you're your own God. We call that humanism. And humanists own the system, and they teach their religious belief in the place of science. Now, these verses are talking about idolatry. The highest form of idolatry is to think you are your own God. That's humanism today. You know, both Pew and Barna Research report that the top reasons we lose so many of our youth and even adults today is because they think Darwinian evolution is true and they think Christianity is anti-science. Hey, let's be honest with ourselves. With the things that are taught in public schools, media, parks, museums, etc., it certainly does seem that Christians are against what is taught as science. If we're honest with ourselves, we've got to admit that. But the question is what we're being taught science? That's the question. So I want to take on these two things tonight, and we'll straighten both of these issues out fairly quickly. You know, one of Satan's top lies is that evolution is science, and science is evolution. So I used to speak on college campuses quite often, and you know, you would get into this conversation with the college kids, and they would say, well, like this email points out, it said, you make Christians look stupid when you attack science. Face it, evolution is a proven fact. Where they're convoluting science and evolution like they're the same thing. See, I would never attack science. I'm a Christian. Why in the world would I attack science? Science is on my side. Real science is our best friend. You might be saying, how do you figure that? You're going to see it here in a few minutes. But they have confused science and evolution like they're the same thing. So when I used to speak on college campuses, I'd walk up to the podium, and a lot of times the professors, they would help me out by giving the kids extra credit to come there and harass and attack me. It was fantastic. Filled up the auditorium, and I would walk up to the podium, and everyone would be sitting there just arms crossed, glaring with hatred at me. And I always thought, this is kind of weird. I'm just going to give them another way to look at the world. You'd think they would be open, but boy, just closed-minded. And God just gave this to me one night. And I walked up to the podium before I started. I said, hey, before I start, I want to ask you guys a couple of questions. How many of you have been taught that biblical creation is a religious belief? Oh, man, they raised their hands. I said, you know, it is. It's a belief about how it came about. Hey, let me ask you another question. How many of you have been taught that evolution is science? Oh, man, they raised their hands. They're not going to let me attack science on their campus, boy. And so then I would get this confused look on my face and say, wow, you know, I'm kind of confused. When I ask you about creation, you said it's a religious belief. But when I ask you about evolution, you said it's science. I mean, aren't they both exactly the same thing? And everyone got this puzzled look on their face like many of you have. And I said, aren't they both beliefs on how we came about? And suddenly those cross arms and hate-filled eyes would just melt and it'd be like, hey, they are both beliefs on how we came about. How come we're being taught this one is science? I'd say because secular atheists own the system and they're teaching you their religious belief in the place of science. Now let's look at some information, and man, their eyes and their ears were open. You know, the word science has different definitions. However, you don't hear the definitions other than operational science, if anything, in a secular school. So let's define and show the difference between real science, operational science, and historical science, and you're going to see it's not science at all. You know, whenever you see something in a science book, or you hear a scientist said, or it's in a journal or a magazine or the media, and you're getting these facts given to you, you assume it's operational science. Now, you may have never have heard the term operational science. You may never have heard the definition, but this is what you think. You're getting proven facts, right? That's operational science. That's knowledge derived from the study and testing of evidence. You have to have the evidence, and you can test it over and over and over and over and over, and you always get the same result that becomes a scientific fact. So when you see something in a science book or journal, etc., you assume they are giving you a proven fact. And that's where you get misled. You see, a lot of times people will say we're anti-science. In fact, I was talking in a public high school in Oregon last year, and I came in, and the kids came in, and man, they're just sitting there all cross-armed like colleges. I was actually taken aback. I didn't realize they were getting that indoctrinated in high school. But God just gave this to me, and I said, hey, before I start, I want to ask you all a question. Of the 200 or so branches of modern science, how many of those do you guys think were started by Christians? None. Try over 80%. Did you know that? 82% of the branches of modern science were started by Christians. Real science has always been on our side. It's always been our best friend. But over the last 150 years, secularists and atheists have taken over science, and now they force everything to go through their religious belief, or they won't publish it. So real science has been our best friend. Louis Pasteur, who Heinz was mentioning, Isaac Newton, the greatest scientist of all time, wrote over 100,000 pages about the Bible. The father of the scientific method, Francis Bacon. On and on we could go. Over 80% of the branches of modern science started by Christians. And if you want to win an argument with someone that says otherwise, when they say you guys are anti-science, ask them, how many of the branches of modern science, of the 200 or so branches, do you think were started by Christians? And they're going to say 2 or 3. No, over 80%. And it's going to shock them, and it's going to take the wind out of their sails, so maybe they'll just open up their minds to the truth. Real science is our best friend, always has been, always will be. Now, the Bible is the only book in the history of the world that lives on its ability to correctly predict the future. Hundreds and hundreds of prophecies have been made that have already come true. Many are shaping up before our eyes today. So here's one in the New Testament. This is a spectacular prophecy, and it goes, the start of it is that there'll come in the last days scoffers. Have you guys ever run into a scoffer? Well, the next time you run into one and they're doing their thing, just say, hey, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to say praise God for you, because you're proving to me the Bible's true. You're fulfilling biblical prophecy right before my eyes. Well, these scoffers, the Bible says, are going to say all kinds of things like, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. This is known as uniformity. I'm sorry, I usually don't use that word, but I didn't cut it down today. Uniformitarianism, it just means uniformity. Things are uniform. Scoffers are going to claim that things are uniform, and that brings us to historical science. Now remember, real science, your best friend, operational science, is knowledge derived from the study of the evidence. Historical science are explanations of non-observable events that took place in the past. Well, you can't test, you can't study, observe anything, so you make up a story that you wrap around the evidence. That's historical science. It's called the historical narrative. Well, there's many problems with that, but number one is the bias of the person making up the story. They're going to make it fit their belief system. And for the last 150 years, that all you see in schools and magazines, it's got to go through the humanist, the atheist belief system. So you're going to get the atheist story when it comes to unobserved events. Let me give you an example of the difference between the results of real operational science versus historical narratives. Have you ever seen oil drain from a car? You know, they pull out that plug in the bottom and boom, the oil pours into the pan below. Well, you can test and study and observe that over and over and over and over, and you're going to conclude that it takes about 2 minutes to fill that pan with oil. That's operational science. You've seen it happen over and over and over again. But let's say you've never seen oil drain from a car, and you come along just 5 minutes later and you observe the full pan of oil, and you want to know how long it took to fill that pan with oil. So now you watch it for 3 days, 5 days, for an entire week. And after an entire week, 1 drop of oil falls into the pan below. Boop. Well, based on historical science, that it's always been the same rate, 1 drop per week, you conclude it took 2,000 years to fill that pan with oil. And you will be absolutely wrong. And that's the difference between real operational science and historical science right there. And it's historical science and their historical narratives, their stories, their fairy tales, where controversy is found between the Bible and what masquerades as science. So as I went back earlier and said, you know, if you look at what's taught today, it seems like the Bible has controversies with science. It's always historical narratives, never operational science. Real science is on our side. The reason for that is the Bible is true, word for word and cover to cover. It's our mistake if we don't trust that. And since atheists make up the stories, of course their stories are going to conflict with the Word of God. No wonder the Bible tells us in 1 Timothy 6 to avoid oppositions of science, falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. Watch out for false science, for false knowledge. So we're going to look at some of the historical narratives of Darwinian biased biology. You know, you might recognize some of their supposed proofs of Darwinism. I want to point something out before I even start. If you look in a biology or biochemistry book about the proofs for Darwinism, you will find that their proofs are always drawings. There's an old saying that goes like this: Darwinists are experts at drawing things that never existed to support their theory that never took place. If you take away their box of crayons, they've got nothing. And you're going to see why in just a couple of minutes here. I'll show you why it's a scientific impossibility. Think about what this atheist, so you know where he's coming from, biology professor from Harvard had to say about evolutionary biology, Darwinian biology. He said, evolutionary biology, in contrast with physics and chemistry, which are hard sciences, is a what? Historical science. It's a great big story, a fairy tale. See, physics and chemistry are real science. Hard science is operational science, is built on the testing and study of existing evidence. But Darwinian biology is based on non-observable past events. Because they don't see it happening in the present, they've got nothing to go with. So as he says, one constructs a historical narrative that led to the events. It's a great big fairy tale. You know, they see a human has a torso and a head on top and 2 arms and 2 legs, and they see an ape and it has a torso and a head on top and 2 arms and 2 legs. So they make up this story about how one evolved from the other. And it's nothing but a story with no evidence behind it. This is the reason when I used to speak on college campuses, I'd do the hour-long message, and then I'd do the hour-long open Q&A, because if I just left, the professors would have said, oh boy, if I could talk. No, I always did the open Q&A for an hour so the professors could ask her any questions, and all they had to do was to blow me out of the auditorium was to show one example of Darwinian macroevolution ever having taken place. And they can't do it. You'll see more of this. You'll understand more in a few minutes. But again, back to the Bible and their prophecies. This was given to the ancient Israelites that people would turn their back on God, saying to a stone, "Thou hast brought me forth." Wow. Well, that was the ancient Israelites. I mean, we would never let anyone tell us, or our children or our grandchildren, that they came from a stone today, right? I mean, we wouldn't sit back and let that be taught, right? Well, you know, let's go to the modern textbook and see what's being taught. Kids, step into your imaginary time machine and push a few buttons. Does this sound like science coming our way? And then it says Earth is thought, believed, to have formed 4.6 billion years ago. Who saw that take place? And scientists theorize, believe, that Earth started as a big ball of rock. And oceans formed as it rained on this stone, the rock, for millions of years, and poof, here you are today. They are teaching we came from a rock, a stone. A wet rock, but a rock nonetheless. There's scientific problems with that I'll get into in just a moment, but the Bible tells us, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the rudiments of the world, after the traditions of man, and not after Christ. Beware of man's philosophies. And there are really only 2 viable worldviews out there. Either the world evolved on its own, like secular atheists teach, or God created the world just like he said he did it. Well, I live in northern Arizona, about 30 miles from Sedona, the New Age capital of the world. And in Sedona, they do have that group of people that say, well, maybe we're not here at all. Maybe we just think we're here. But now, as a general rule, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to that group, because we really are here. And the Bible says, prove all things and hold fast that which is good. Now, I have people say to me quite often, you're not supposed to prove the Bible's true. Well, that's not what the Bible says. God's not afraid of science. Real science finds the truth. The truth comes from God. He wants you proving things. If we proved all things, we never would have let Darwinian evolution in the front door, because there's no evidence that it happened. So let's prove all things. I'm going to go through the top 10 historical narratives of Darwinian evolution. I'm not going to read these off right now because we're about to go right through them in the next 35 or so minutes. So historical narrative number 1 is that life came from non-life. You know, Darwin speculated that life started in a little warm pond. And then we went into spontaneous generation, that somehow, poof, life came about from non-life. And as that short video showed, that's been proven to be a scientific impossibility through the law of biogenesis, that life only comes from life. So then they switched over to a biogenesis. Biogenesis is basically a fancy form of spontaneous generation. It's spread out over long ages of time. Long ages of time is always their magic ingredient. But somewhere along the way, somewhere you had to have that poof moment where non-life came to life, and that, my friends, is spontaneous generation, which is a scientific impossibility. So they cannot get life to start from non-life. Now, I want to be fair to the Darwinists, even though they're not fair to us, because they get very mad if I even mention the law of biogenesis and the fact life can't come from non-life. The reason for that is you can't get non-life to produce life. So that's kind of the end of Darwinism right there if you can't get life started. So now they teach that Darwinian evolution, the origin of species, has nothing to do with the start of life. So the origin of the species now has nothing to do with the origin of the species. Just wanted you to know that's what they're going to tell you. And this is because of real science, your best friend, like the law of biogenesis, which is that life only comes from life. Non-living matter cannot produce life. So they're going to try to fool kids into thinking that they have created life in the labs. They have never come anywhere near creating life in a lab. They cannot do it. Though they have experiments, and think about this, extremely well thought out and designed experiments mixing chemicals together have been able to come up with some non-living amino acids. Well, there are hundreds of amino acids out there, and the 20 specific ones for life all have to come in left-handed versions with all right-handed nucleotide sugars. And there's no mathematical possibility nature can do that. You get a mix of these 200, you don't get the 20, and they have a mix of 50-50 right and left-handed types with 50-50 mix of right and left-handed nucleotide sugars. There's no way life can come about. And that's just non-living amino acids. We're not talking life here. So they try to indicate. They don't come right out and claim because they get slammed, but they try to indicate that life's been made in the lab. It would be like us creating calcium. And since calcium is found in people claiming we have created a human being, they've come nowhere near creating life in a lab. The law of biogenesis has never been known to have been overcome. So think about it logically. The world's brightest scientific minds, building on years and years of hundreds of thousands or millions of other scientists' research, with billions of dollars of lab equipment and salaries thrown in, cannot produce life in a lab under the best of conditions, even with computers, etc. Yet we're supposed to believe that rocks and seawater did it on their own. Oh, but not today when you could test, study, and observe it. Oh no, long ago and far away, I guess in the land of Oz. So at the course at the college is Northern Arizona University that started the course Attacking Me in Biblical Creation. I went to their book, and by the way, for their final exam, they just made fun of me for an hour and a half. I mean, really? I've been married 43 years. You think that's going to bother me? Come on, right? I'm just kidding. Oh, now I'm getting the cross look. I was just kidding. Now I'm in trouble. So I went to their book. I wanted to see how they, in their class Attacking Creation, explain the start of life without God. Now, the book was written by this outspoken atheist who is president of the National Center of Science Education, and on page 26, she explained the origin of life was a continuum of events with a lot of iffy stuff in the middle. That is the modern college explanation of how life started without God. It got lost in the iffy stuff. This Nobel Prize-winning Harvard professor stated, modern biologists, having reviewed the downfall of spontaneous generation, yet unwilling to accept creation, are left with nothing. they've got nothing, but they own the system. So they keep teaching their refuted stories. Historical narrative number 2. You've probably heard this. Life didn't start out as anything complex. It was just a simple cell. You've heard of the simple cell? This textbook says all the many forms of life on Earth today are descended, stated as a scientific fact, from a common ancestor found in a population of primitive unicellular organisms. Stated as a fact. How is a kid supposed to argue with that? And what evidence do they have of this? So it says 2 sentences later, no traces of those events remain. Wait a minute, I thought science was knowledge from the study of evidence. From the Big Bang, and we're on our 4th Big Bang, by the way. Don't come up to me, God could use a Big Bang, because they've all been refuted. The cover story of Scientific American in April of 2011, 15 years ago, was how they need to get rid of the current Big Bang. It's got so many holes they can never fix it. So that was 15 years ago. Why are they still teaching it? Because they've got no other explanation for the start of the universe or life except for in the beginning God created, which has never been refuted, by the way. But from the Big Bang to the Big Rock to the rain on the rock to the poof moment where life overcame the law of biogenesis, involved everything from a simple unicellular organism to everything on Earth, there is not one shred of evidence any of that ever took place. It is a great big historical narrative. You know, I'll tell you how you spot these very easily. If anything starts out, let's say, 10,000 years ago, or 50,000 years ago, or 1 million years ago, or 1 billion years ago, or 4.6 billion, or 13.6 billion years ago, you have a great big fairy tale coming your way. In fact, they just started out once upon a time, because a story, a big fairy tale, is about to follow. Anytime you hear that, ask yourself, did anyone observe that? And if the answer is no, you've got a story coming your way, and it's going to be an atheist-based story. If you think about it, it starts to become real easy to spot these, very easy. Easy to tell them apart. But let's just take a quick look at a bacteria cell, a supposed simple cell. They're run by tiny molecular motors called bacterial flagellum that allow the cell to swim around and perform its various functions. It can even change gears depending on how much weight it's towing or pushing. It's made up of about 40 very specific proteins that have to be in the exact order at the exact moment for life to start. And that's known as irreducibly complex. If one piece is missing, the whole thing doesn't work. And to make matters worse for the fairy tale of Darwinian evolution, it requires other molecular motors to put the flagellum together. And this is why we have the law of biogenesis. The more that real science, a Christian's best friend, gets into the cell, the more and more complex they become. I don't think we even understand more than 10% of the operation of a cell right now. It is so complex, and the more real science gets into it, the more complex it becomes. And talk about complex, then there's genetic information. I mean, genetic information is spectacular, and right now, you're made up of about 75 trillion cells. That's a number beyond our comprehension. I'll talk about this in a couple minutes. And each of your cells' DNA contain 3 billion base pairs of genetic information. 3 billion times 75 trillion. The information is spectacular. And genetic information reads forwards and backwards. Our best technology reads in one direction. I mean, try to write a half a page on how to operate a cell phone, but it has to read backwards and tell you how to build a sailboat. We can't do that type of thing even with computers. This is what God has done with genetic information. One mathematician and molecular biologist calculated the odds of just one DNA chromosome forming on its own in nature to be 1 in 10 to the 100 billionth power. Now, what kind of a number is that? Well, 1 in 10 to the 80th power is pretty much accepted to be absolute zero. 1 in 10 to the 100 billionth. Do you guys have a state lottery here? Okay, well, your odds of winning the state lottery 52 weeks a year for 27,000 years in a row is better mathematically than one DNA chromosome forming on its own. In other words, it's never going to happen. Might be why we have things like the law of biogenesis, real science. In fact, Jack Sostek is a Nobel Prize-winning biologist from Harvard. And back in 2016 and 17, he came out and announced he had proven RNA could self-replicate. Well, this was a huge victory for Darwinism because that indicated that possibly life could have started on its own. It was all over the news around the globe. Darwinists were celebrating. And then in 2018, he came out and said, you know, yeah, I never did find any evidence of that. I just wanted to believe it so bad, I announced that I had. And that's a Nobel winning prize scientist. I can actually give several examples just like that. It's sad. Let's get back to that simple cell. So you're made of an estimated 75 trillion cells, with each cell's DNA containing 3 billion base pairs of genetic information. Let's get a feel for big numbers. Just take a moment. Let's use seconds, like 60 seconds in a minute. A million seconds was 11 days ago. Well, what's the difference between a million seconds and a billion seconds? Well, if a million seconds ago was 11 days ago, a billion seconds ago was in 1994. That's the difference between a million and a billion. We throw these numbers around like popcorn, and we don't understand what they mean. A trillion seconds ago would have been 32,000 years of time. Wow, a billion seconds is 32 years of time. Wow. How many of you aren't even a billion seconds old right now? Yeah, exactly. Way past some of your lifetimes. And this information to code for all 8 billion or so people on Earth is so compact it could fit into the container the size of an aspirin. To code all 8 billion people on Earth. Wow. Magnificent design, by the way. Complexity and design. Okay, historical narrative number 3, since there's no such thing as a simple cell, and we've got the law of biogenesis as well, is neo-Darwinism. And this is what has actually been taught for quite a while now. That is that see, Darwin had a problem, in fact, in that Darwinism on its own had no way for nature to add new and beneficial genetic information to power Darwinian change. So they came up with neo-Darwinism, claiming that mutations create the new and beneficial genetic information. Mutations are the hero to the Darwinian plot. Now, they have all sorts of mutations, and if you're interested in this, I have a paragraph, a chapter in my book that I use just one simple paragraph each to torpedo each one of these false beliefs. But they claim duplication, i.e. copying errors, point mutations, Hox gene mutations, or frame shift mutations. These are some of their big supposed claims. We can shoot them all down very quickly. Let's just look at frame shift mutations. They're one of the most popular claims that they throw out there. Frame shifts can come in deletions, insertions, and inversions. So I'm going to use these 3 sentences to show you what a mutation does to useful information, functional information. I'm going to use these 3 sentences. The day was hot, the hot day had one sun, the sun was hot the one day. That is functional information. It makes sense. It does have information there. Now, you can have a deletion that deletes the first letter, that T of the word the. It gets deleted. Well, that causes all of the information to shift left, and you end up with this. You go from 17 functional words to 17 non-functional junk words. Now, technically, they claim that 17 new words. If you want to lose a debate with a biology professor, claim that mutations cannot add new information. I mean, technically, that's new information. It's a loss of all functional words and all the functional meaning, but technically, that's new information. If you want to win a debate with a biology professor, say that nature cannot produce new and beneficial genetic information, now you win the debate. So it's important, the words that you use. They can't come up with new and beneficial for their magical natural selector. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. To function, it has to have beneficial information to act upon, and they can't come up with new and beneficial. So, see, mutations are caused by the sorting or loss of the parent's information. So the mutant offspring gets the genetic information from the parents, and the mutation causes a loss of information. So mutations create weaker gene pools. It's called genetic depletion, or I just call it gene depletion for short. So mutation theory does not work. Historical narrative number 4 is that microevolution and macroevolution are the same thing. Now this is easy to describe, and this, just like knowing the difference between operational and historical science, is huge. Darwinian evolution is Darwinian macroevolution. It's one kind, like a dog producing a non-dog, let's say a whale. And that's basically what they teach took place. A land-dwelling canine-type creature evolved into a whale, given the magic ingredient, which is, millions and billions of years of time, right? You're not still mad at me, are you? Okay. Well, you're still kind of cross-armed. I just want to make sure. Okay. I'm just kidding with you. So Darwinian macroevolution would be like the dog producing the whale. There's no evidence of this. I'm not going to get into the whale evolution series right now because I don't want to go on that rabbit trail, but they got no evidence of macro. See, macro, think about this. Darwinian macroevolution requires massive amounts of new and beneficial information added to a gene pool. Gene pools get better and better under Darwinian macro needs, right? That brings us to biblically correct microevolution. Microevolution are changes within the same type, the same kind. So, does anyone here have a pet dog? Guys, ever have pet dogs? We have 350 types of dogs on Earth today. But dogs only produce dogs. That would be with changes within the dogs. Like I have a purebred yellow lab. The way they get purebreds is they use gene depletion and they breed out. They lose the information they don't want. So when you get a purebred, if you get 2 purebred yellow labs and they're going to have puppies together, your puppies are going to be yellow labs because they don't have any other genetic information to create anything else. If you breed 2 mutts together, you have no idea what those puppies are going to look like, right? Because they have the wide gene pool. You won't know until they're born. But gene depletion is a scientific fact, and changes can only happen within the same kind of plant or animal because the changes are caused by the loss of information. So macro Darwinian evolution needs new and beneficial being added in massive amounts. Micro changes are caused by the loss of information. They're polar opposites, okay? So it's a scientific fact, that one almost got me. It's a scientific fact that micro adaptations take place, as kinds can only bring forth after their kind. Dogs can only bring forth dogs, cats only bring forth cats, pine trees only bring forth pine trees. Kinds only bring forth after their kind. Why is it vital and life-changing for a Christian to understand that kinds only bring forth after their kind? Because 10 times in the book of Genesis, we're told plants or animals will bring forth after their kind. And the only thing real science, your best friend, has ever seen is that kinds only bring forth after their kind, and the changes within the types of dogs are caused by the loss of information as the gene pools get weaker and weaker, not stronger and stronger. See, microadaptations are also caused by the sorting or loss of the parent's starting genetic information. They produce weaker and weaker gene pools. Now, since 2001, when I was on college campuses, I was telling the college groups how you destroy Darwinism scientifically in 4 seconds flat, and that is that gene depletion plus natural selection makes Darwinism a scientific impossibility. Gene pools get weaker and weaker, and eventually they get removed. I'm going to talk about natural selection in a second, but so you're never going to see nature produce, let's say, a golden finch retriever. It's just simply, it's not going to happen. If we could come up with that, through genetic engineering maybe, but not through any sort of natural process. I did want to mention quickly about natural selection. There is no selector out there. Yet we do see weaker gene pools die off and get removed from the gene pool. But there's no selector out there. It's actually a well-designed system by God. Just like He put a well-designed wide variety of genetic information in His created kind so it could adapt to various conditions, even though it's through the loss of information. God also knew that the loss of information through adaptations and mutations would eventually cause everything to go extinct. So He also put a well-designed system in, a limit on how much genetic information could be lost, and if they cross that limit, they're removed. It's God's QA program, and it's a well-designed system. There's no natural selector, and that kills Darwinism all by itself. Now, I just actually articulated that about a month ago, and it's in my new book. I explained it a lot better. But kids are given lots of examples of biblically correct micro changes, because that's all they have, are biblically correct kinds bringing forth after their kind. But then they're led to think in terms of Darwinian macroevolution. It's the old bait and switch con game. And kids don't know that that's exactly what the Bible says will happen, and it's the opposite of what Darwinism requires. You know, Darwin, he never saw an example of Darwinian evolution. He saw finches producing what? Finches. He saw an example of biblically correct micro changes caused by the sorting and the loss of the starting genetic information. There's never been an example of Darwinian evolution found. They focus on biblically correct micro because there's no evidence of macro to show anybody. Historical narrative 5a, homology, the study of similarities. Have you ever heard that your biochemistry is 98% the same as that from a chimpanzee? You've heard that, right? They throw that out all the time. Now, real science, your best friend, I've seen studies published in Nature magazine, the most prestigious scientific journal, that say there's a 30% difference. So why are they still saying 2%? That's just an out-and-out lie. You know, if genetic similarity proves our evolutionary past, they should teach kids that we evolved from worms. Your biochemistry is 75% is that from a worm. Your biochemistry is 50% the same as that from a banana. Anyone evolved from a banana? Just two. That's not bad. Because last time I was at a college, 500 students raised their hand to that question because they've been taught we evolved from a common ancestor found in a population of primitive unicellular organisms, which would mean we are related to bananas. But that doesn't really make any sense, does it? So when I got home that night, I got online and checked my family tree just to be safe. Yeah. I didn't find a banana in the whole bunch. Oh. Didn't find my sense of humor very appealing back over here. Yeah. Now, I did find a couple of nuts and one fruitcake, but no bananas, okay? So, genetic similarity does not support Darwinism. As a matter of fact, one of their biggest ways of fooling people is to talk about similarities, okay? Think about this. Similarities are proof you've got a similar designer. It's not because you evolved from a wet rock. I drive a Ford pickup truck. My next door neighbor has a Ford van. Their dashboards are identical. Yeah, it's not because they evolved from a moped. It's because they had the same designer. Any argument of similarities, if you hear it and you're thinking about what they're showing, oh wait, but that's an argument about similarities. That just proves we have the same designer. Historical narrative number 6 is antibiotic or poison resistance. And they say that's proof of Darwinian macroevolution. It has nothing to do with evolution at all. Let's say I had 1,000 cockroaches right here on the floor, and they were running right toward this nice lady who's been mad at me. She's not mad at me, but I'm just kidding. But let's say I sprayed them and it killed 998, but 2 of them survived. Did they instantaneously evolve an immune system? Of course not. They already had the gene in their DNA that allowed them to survive that particular poison. The others didn't have it, or it was turned off. Now, they survived, and when they have offspring, the offspring inherit that gene as well, and they're immune to the poison. They evolved nothing. So why do Darwinists use this as one of their big proofs? because they have nothing. They've got nothing else. They have to grab at any straw they can get. Historical narrative number 6 has the antibiotic and poison resistance has nothing to do with Darwinian macro change. Narrative number 7 comes from embryology, the study of embryos. Ernst Haeckel came up with this in 1869. That was 10 years after Darwin's book came out. Well, he had the same problem Darwinists have today. He couldn't find any evidence that it ever happened, so he did what Darwinists have become famous for. He made up some evidence. He took and drew a picture of a human in the embryonic stage, and then he made copies of the human with slight changes and labeled them fish, salamander, turtles, etc., and came up with what was called the theory of recapitulation, the biogenetic law that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. How's a kid supposed to argue with that? You know what that means? It means you go through your evolutionary stages while you're in your mother's womb. Now, this was a total fraud. In fact, those are his drawings left right across the top with the pictures right below that don't look like his drawings. It was proven in the 1870s that they were fakes, that it was a fraud. Proven in the 1870s and still taught in college today. And fraud in the 19th century, it's still fraud in the 21st century. Here's a modern college textbook using Haeckel's original drawings as their proof. And it says, kids, whether they develop into fish, amphibians, or humans, all vertebrate embryos start out very similar with gill slits and a long tail. We used to have gill slits and a long tail, and then it asked rhetorically, why would humans have embryos with gill slits and a long tail unless their ancestors had these features? And kids' faith is destroyed by the millions. Well, first of all, let me point out, you never had a tail. Our spine is one of the first things to develop, and we call the end of our spine the tailbone. There was never a tail there. And if there had been, that would be losing something, not gaining it anyways. And you never had gills or gill slits where the gills used to go. Those are folds in the skin that later develop in the organs in your throat and neck area. No gills, no gill slits, and no tails. Just lies in the textbooks. Wow. You know, they would show, if they had them, wouldn't they show pictures instead of taking their box of crayons and drawing things? Speaking of drawings, historical narrative number 8 is the fossil record. It's all bluff and bluster when they say the fossil record's on their site. The fossil record is a total embarrassment to Darwinian evolution. But they show these evolutionary trees of life. And at the base, someone typed in the word invertebrate ancestor. Why did they show what it was? Well, they wouldn't have any idea what it was. And if they put something in there, then it opens it up to study and they get refuted. So they just typed the word in there. And then somebody took a box of crayons and drew nice colorful lines connecting the word invertebrate ancestor to all sorts of things. And kids think that this is proof. They're assuming this is backed up by science. No, each one of those colorful lines would require thousands and thousands of missing links, fossils that slowly showed the change from your invertebrate ancestor to a monkey or an ape or a whale or a worm or whatever. And as of an hour ago, they have no viable transitional fossils that'll stand up to scrutiny. The fossil record has been proven to be a total embarrassment to Darwinian evolution. I think about this logically. Anthropologists and paleontologists, they'll tell you that bones will sing any song you want to sing. Any song you want to hear, bones will sing. And so they'll make up their stories, and they get refuted after 10 or 20 or 30 years, and they just put more in there, and they just get refuted. But it's just an ongoing situation. But here's one they can't get out of. We have over 6 million classified species on Earth. Over 6 million without a single half this, half that between any of them. So let them argue about their unscrupulous fossils. Let's show us some living transitional beings. They can't do it. You know, they use the lobe-finned fish. They say the lobe-finned fish went extinct 325 million years ago, and he didn't swim, so he walked around the bottom of the ocean on his lobe fins. And I guess he got bored with that one day and came out on land and became an amphibian. It's a nice story, but I mean, you know, the amphibian has feet, shoulders, elbows, claws, a central nervous system, a muscular system, a skeletal system, and more that fish don't have. And real science, a believer's best friend, knows of no way for nature to add that kind of information to a gene pool. And even worse, the lobe-finned fish hasn't been extinct for 325 million years. He's been found alive today in several oceans. And he doesn't walk around on the bottom of the ocean. He's a very good swimmer. And the interesting thing, think about this, is the fossilized version that we are told is 325 million years old, 5 times as long as they say dinosaurs have been extinct, looks exactly like the living version with no change whatsoever. Wow, no change whatsoever. Keep this lobe-finned fish in mind here, because we're going to come back to it. You're going to see some fraud here that it just blows my mind. Now, appropriately on April Fool's Day of 2006, Tiktaalik rosea was introduced to the world. And along with Lucy, this is now one of their 2 messiahs of Darwinian evolution. Now, on the day it was put forth, the New York Times stated, "It's still a fish exhibiting changes that anticipate the beginnings of wrists, elbows, and shoulders." Let that sink in. It doesn't have the beginnings of wrists, elbows, and shoulders. It anticipates getting the beginnings. How do you anticipate random supposed mutations that are cause this nubby little bone are going to turn it into wrists, elbows, and shoulders, and the central nervous system, the muscular system, and more? I don't even know what to say about it. It's fraud at such a high level. But Tiktaalik is now one of the messiahs, the 2 messiahs of Darwinism. But think about this. Tiktaalik and that fossilized lobe-finned fish both have that little nubby bone in their side, and the living lobe-finned fish still has that nubby bone in the side. From the fossil lobe-fin to the living lobe-fin, no change at all. So they find Tiktaalik with the nubby bone, and they make up this story, this historical narrative on how it evolved into all these other appendages. Fraud at a level that's almost impossible to even imagine. And we have other fish, like some catfish, that have those nubby bones with no evolutionary change, just frauds in the textbooks. You know, they find insects and reptiles entombed in amber, which is petrified tree sap. And we're told, according to the geologic time scale, which I'll cover Saturday, the top 10 old Earth beliefs, but they find reptiles and insects trapped in the amber and supposedly 240 million years old, and they look just like today's insects and reptiles with no evolutionary change. None at all. So back in about the 1920, I think it was 1929, Richard Goldschmidt came up with a theory to explain why they had no evidence. It was called the hopeful monster theory. And he said, well, maybe reptiles laid eggs and birds popped out, leaving no evidence behind. Well, everybody was laughing at the hopeful monster theory back in 1929. So in 1980, Niles Eldridge and Stephen Gould of Harvard, they changed hopeful monster slightly, but they gave it a much better sounding name, and it's punctuated equilibrium. If you ask a professor, why is there no evidence in the fossil record? You're going to be told, don't you know anything? Punctuated equilibrium. Well, what that means is evolution didn't happen over a long period of time, but there was a spurt of evolution and a long period with no change. They call it stasis. And a spurt of evolution and a long period with no change. And because of that, no evidence got captured in the fossil record. Think about it. They've got a theory to explain why they've got no evidence. I thought science was knowledge derived from the study of the evidence. Darwinian evolution is the biggest historical fairy tale in the history of the world without one shred of evidence that it ever took place. And billions, not millions, billions of people over the last 100 years have rejected Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, thinking that it's true. Mind-boggling. Hey, let's go back to historical narrative 5, but now will be part B. We talked about similar biochemistry. And keep those lobe-finned fish in mind here. But what about similar bone structure? They show these drawings, and in the center they have the foreleg of a lizard. To the right they have a forearm of a human. At the top, a flipper of a whale. Over here, the leg of a bird. And they all have two bones in the forelimb, and they say this proves they have a common ancestor. Similarity in bone structure proves evolution. And who is the common ancestor that they say we all evolved from? The lobe-finned fish. This college book is teaching that we evolved from the lobe-finned fish that is found fossilized and living with no change whatsoever. Wow. Wow. And again, similarities just prove you have the same designer. And that's why you can't find any evidence to support Darwinian macroevolution. Historical narrative number 9. Birds are simply a twig, this is from Berkeley, on the dinosaur's tree of life. Why in the world they open themselves to this type of scrutiny and ridicule is beyond my comprehension, but they stick with it. They claim that dinosaurs evolved into birds. Well, this is also from Berkeley. Take feathers. Compsognathus evolved the first hair-like feathers. Compsognathus was a little dinosaur. He's about the size of a chicken. And this was their messiah for the dinosaur to bird evolution, saying he was the first feathered dinosaur. But back in 2017, a well-preserved Compsognathus fossil was found, and it had all scales. No feathers, no hairs starting to become feathers. And this should have crushed it almost 10 years ago, but they still talk about it. It's now been proven all their claimed feathered dinosaurs either had hair or were extinct flightless birds, think something like an emu. So Archaeopteryx they've tried to use Archaeopteryx. It was found 2 years after Darwin's book came out, and they've always tried to claim it's some sort of a missing link. Now they say it was a feathered dinosaur, even though modern birds with feathers are found in the layers below Archaeopteryx, which would mean they were there before the missing link. But Archaeopteryx is about the size of a pigeon and had claws on its wings, so they say it's a reptile becoming a bird. Well, the Hoytson's found in South America. He's about the size of a pigeon, had claws on his wings. No one's claiming him to be a missing link. You know why? Because you could test, study, and observe him, and it would blow their story out of the water. And also, reptile genetic information doesn't have the genetic information of form feathers, which are extremely complex structures. And remember, real science, your best friend, knows of no way for nature to produce that type of genetic information and add it to a gene pool. Narrative number 10, the hominids, the closest link between ape and man. Here's a textbook that shows humans connected to jellyfish and worms, and the proof is what? A nice red line. Hey, what more proof could you want than a nice red line, right? How about some fossil evidence? Oh, they don't have any, that's right. So let's talk about some of the most famous hominids that have misled not millions, billions of people. The first real messiah for Darwinism was Piltdown Man. He was famous from about 1910 till about 1955. For 45 years, he misled so many people that we finally kicked creation and prayer out of our schools and started teaching our kids they evolved from a wet rock with no evidence to back it up whatsoever. And then in the mid-1950s, it was proven he had taken the skull cap of a human, the jawbone from an orangutan, filed them down so they fit together, acid treated both sides, buried them in a rock quarry in Piltdown, England, and waited 2 years, and came along and dug up Piltdown Man, and spent the rest of their lives as world-renowned Darwinists, speaking on any college campus they chose, over a total and complete fraud. Nebraska Man was used as proof of Darwinism. All they found in Nebraska Man was a piece of a broken tooth. But they're pretty creative. From that broken tooth, they reconstructed Nebraska Man, his family, even the tools they would have worked with. I was on a college campus once, and a professor in the Q&A said, "We've got Nebraska Man." I said, Professor, you're about 40 years behind the time here, buddy. They've proven it came from an extinct pig. In fact, this is the real Nebraska man right here. So Lucy, along with Tiktaalik, Lucy's been the other Messiah. Lucy was found, I think, in 1974, so about 52 years ago. Now, when they found it, they found about 40% of a skeleton. And they said, well, we know it's an ape becoming human because the femur, the thigh bone, angles to the knee, and humans have angled thigh bones. They forgot to mention all tree-dwelling apes have angled thigh bones. But they said, well, the knee joint is slightly bigger than a normal ape's knee, proving it's an ape becoming human. Now, if you took the knee joint of everybody in this room, they'd be different sizes. That doesn't prove anything. They also forgot to mention that the knee in question was found over a mile away and 230 feet deeper in the strata. Yeah, if that was Lucy's knee, I want to see the airplane that hit that monkey. It must have been going right through the treetops. I figure about 700 miles an hour. Boom! I mean, there goes the knee right over that way. Wow. Amazing. This from 1987. Anatomists have concluded Lucy is not a link between ape and man and did not walk upright like a human. Yet here's a modern textbook showing Lucy walking upright like a human, nice drawing by the way, and talking on a cell phone. What are the odds? And look at Lucy's feet. They look like modern human feet. I mean, hairy, but modern human feet. Other such fossils have been found. They're called Australopithecus afarensis. They have curved toes and curved fingers so they can grab onto tree limbs. They were a tree-dwelling ape. You know, think about it logically. With millions of various apes, monkeys, and primates having lived and died in the last 500 years alone, I have to ask, why does finding a monkey bone supposedly prove Darwinian evolution? Doesn't it just prove that when monkeys die, they leave their bones behind? And my friends, those are the top 10 historical narratives of Darwinian evolution that have misled billions of people. They've changed the world. This nation was founded by predominantly Christian men and women on predominantly Christian principles. Our legal system was based on the Ten Commandments, and that has all been destroyed by these lies. And our nation is reeling today, and we're just reaping the fruit of having accepted these lies and letting them be taught in our schools to our children and grandchildren. You know, when we're taught that Darwinian evolution is true and Christians are anti-science, we can handle that. I mean, I just destroyed 20 years of evolutionary teaching in about 45 minutes. They also teach there's no evidence of biblical creation. You mean like the law of biogenesis? You mean like kinds only bringing forth after their kind through the loss of genetic information? There's lots of proof of biblical creation out there. And they claim there's no proof of a global flood. There's tons of proof of the global flood. In fact, the global flood is the whole linchpin in the war of worldviews. It's the reason I lead people to Grand Canyon. There used to be layers 2 miles high. If you're on the rim of the canyon looking down, or you see a picture, it's a mile from the rim down to the river. That's a big hole in the ground, right? There's a lot of things they won't tell you there. Like, for instance, the Grand Canyon doesn't cut a mile deep into the plain. The area uplifted, and Grand Canyon is cut through the upwarp. When you're on the rim of Grand Canyon, you're on top of the upwarp looking into the chasm that cuts through the upwarp. Water doesn't flow uphill. The Colorado River had nothing to do with the formation of Grand Canyon. So the other thing is the 2 miles of layers that were removed from above. Have any of you been to Bryce? How about Zion? You were in the middle of what's called the Grand Staircase. A massive erosional event that had to be on a global scale removed. Well, Grand Canyon's missing 900 cubic miles. It's 277 miles long, up to 18 miles wide, averages a mile deep. It's missing 900 cubic miles of sediments. 900. The staircase is missing 133,000 cubic miles of sediments. Grand Canyon's not even 1/150th of what's missing from the staircase. But this erosional event cut the 2,500-foot pink cliffs at Bryce, Remove those layers south to the sea, drop 40 miles, cut the 2,500-foot white and gray cliffs you find at Zion. Remove those layers south to the sea, drop another 40 miles, cut the 2,000-foot tall Vermilion cliffs, which you can see from the rim of Grand Canyon. Remove those layers south to the sea, dropped 100 miles and cut the 2,000-foot tall Mogollon Rim that goes east and west across northern Arizona, and remove those layers south to the sea. So from Phoenix, there used to be layers 2 miles deep. So the rim of Grand Canyon, then as the 2 miles of sediments were removed, there was a massive tectonic event, and the Colorado Plateau buckled upward, forming the upwarp, and eventually the waters cut through the upwarp, leaving Grand Canyon probably in a matter of about 6 days of time. It's the reason the walls are straight up and down. Look at a picture of Grand Canyon. That's indicative of very fast formation. There's hardly any rock debris down in the bottom. That's indicative of recent formation. Rock walls collapse over time. But anyways, I lead tours there. I have one tour, a rim and raft trip. It's a 3-night, 2-day trip. Very safe raft trip, by the way. At one point, I actually tie the rafts up together, and I stand in front and I explain the whole area as we're floating down the canyon. So if you have a chance, it's June 4th through 7th. Last time I checked, there were about 10 seats left. So if you're interested in that, let me know afterwards, and I'll show you where you can get some information on that trip. But we win the debate when we get into it. We can shoot down all of their arguments given even an hour at a time. Hey, give me 5 minutes with most groups, and I can put some serious torpedoes through either Darwinism and or age of the earth. Because the Bible asks rhetorically, and I'll end with this, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? We can rebuild those foundations. Amen. If you'd like help, or you want some information so you can help others, the resources I brought make a huge difference. Now, I only have 3 things out there because I really try to just bring the best of what I can present. I have a thumb drive out there with over 1,000 items on it. I don't recommend this. It's got so much you'll get lost in it. I mean, it's got 200 videos, 200 audios. It's got 4 of the books I've written. It's got 600 articles that I've written. It's got 5 of my PowerPoint presentations. It's got tons and tons of stuff on there. This is the thumb drive I really recommend because this has my 5 top teachings in the order I would present them to anybody. Starting out with the top 10 Darwinian lies in the textbooks. They're all filmed live with all the visuals put in, then endowed by our Creator. In fact, the Darwinian one is the one that caused the college to launch that accredited course. These are the teachings that are on there, the top 10 Darwinian, top 10 old earth beliefs, endowed by our Creator. You know, as an American citizen, your freedoms come from the fact you're endowed by who? God, but specifically your Creator. And we've been teaching the last 3 years of our children there's no Creator. Anyone under the age of 80, when in high school, was taught there's no Creator. And we are reaping the fruit of that today, my friends. Oh, by the way, I also should mention that I don't copyright my thumb drives. I encourage you, if you get any of my thumb drives, you are free to make all the copies you want. You're free to give them to everybody you know, your family, friends, anybody, and encourage them to make copies. And this information will make a difference. I was in Kingman, Arizona, speaking in a church last year, and a gal, she was probably about, I think, 75 years old. She got this, the thumb drive with the 5 teachings. We called it our Give a Reason, based on 1 Peter 3:15, give a reason for the hope that's in your heart. And she got that, and she went home, and she had her 45-year-old son and 25-year-old grandson watch the top 10 Darwinian lies, and by the time she came back to church, she was so happy they had both accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. Because this is one of the biggest stumbling blocks out there. Northwest Christian School has been the #1 private school in Arizona 10 of the last 12 years. And 6 years ago, they asked me if I would work with them and develop a course on biblical creation for their school based on my book, my previous book, The Cost, which I did, and we developed an 18-week course. Now, they also put their courses online, and they've received what's called exemplary accreditation status, which means a public high school kid anywhere in the United States of America, from Alaska to Hawaii to Florida or Maine, any kid taking an American public high school can take that class online, and it qualifies for public school credit. So it's the first time in 60-something years anything about creation's been inside the public schools. Well, interestingly enough, last August, I had been talking to folks and explaining historical versus operational science, and people's mouths drop open. When you're up here talking, you see all these reactions. People, I don't think they think you see them, but you do. And people's mouths would just drop open, and I realized it was having a massive impact. It only takes 2 minutes to explain it. So I actually rewrote my entire book. I spent almost 900 hours from August until the middle of February rewriting, reorganizing, updating that book to make it the best, the most comprehensive book I could come up with. It covers the most issues in the simplest, to-the-point fashion, just like I present things, and the easiest to understand methods I could. And anyways, I got it back in my hands. The whole time I'm working on this thing, I'm thinking, is anyone even going to see this? I mean, you know, Russ, you're making about 2 cents an hour the whole time you're doing this. But I just felt led to do it, and I just kept working on it. And I got it done in the middle of February, and we just got it back from the printer 3 weeks ago, Wednesday. So I got it late in the afternoon on Wednesday, and the next morning, Thursday, I get a call from that school superintendent, Northwest Christian. Now, I haven't actually spoke to him in 3+ years. And out of the blue, he calls me, and I've only had this book in my hand about 12 hours, and he says, hey, Russ, we really enjoyed working with your book before, and we still have the class going, but we're going to circle back to creation with our reading program for our staff and families this summer, and I was wanting to ask you, do you know of any good creation book we could use? I'm like, well, you could use my new book that I just got in my hand 12 years ago, and they ordered 500 of them. And they're going to have all their staff, almost 180 people, and all their parents of their students, their high school students, go through that. And I just kind of felt that was a God thing. You know, the whole time I was wondering, why am I even doing this? But man, I was going to do it. I was just led to do it. So it covers operational science, the top 10 old earth beliefs, top 10 evil fruit of old earth beliefs, top 10 Darwinian beliefs, top 10 reasons to believe in biblical creation, and much, much more. There's a whole paragraph on false Christ shall arise, and false Christs that people need to be aware of inside the church today. And I won't get into it right now, but you can read it, and I use over 80 Bible verses in that. In the book, I use over 300 Bible verses and 300 scientific references, so it's very tied into the Word of God. And then there's our Grand Canyon tours. If you're interested in that June 4th through 7th, ask me, and I'll give you a website where you can get some information. But that's my website right there, creationministries.org. But let me end my part with a word of prayer. Heinz, if you have something else you want to say, or Pastor Rick. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this evening and for this church and the staff at this church that will stand on your word. I thank you for Heinz and Greta and all they do to get your message out there. I hope and I pray that the information I've shared tonight will be eye-opening and faith-strengthening, and provide us with information that we can use to help others stay on that narrow pathway that leads to that straight gate into heaven with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I ask this in Jesus' great name. Amen. God bless you guys.
But let's give them a hand. Give us questions. So how many are going to go home and look at your student, your grandchild, or a child's science book and check it out? There's a lot of good stuff that was shared here. So we'll take a few minutes for a few questions. Put up your hand quickly, and we'll get the answers from Russ, and I'll bring the mic around. Yeah, question back here.
Very long, only about less than 200 meters. It won't contain all of the living stuff today, right?
Well, that's a good question. Basically, you're asking, how did they get all the animals on the ark? Is that more or less?
By that time, all the people maybe still in that region because the Tower of Babel happened after the flood. My understanding is that time like some of the animals got into the ark, and other stuff across the globe like still have a lot of plants or whatever stuff survived.
Let me talk about. I'll answer several of those things. Those are actually several good questions, by the way, and people have those questions, so I appreciate you asking. So let me do my best to answer. I actually cover that in my message, Noah's Ark and Dinosaurs, but no, it was a global flood that covered all the high hills under the whole heaven, and God made it to destroy the land-dwelling creatures that lived on the earth. So first of all, how many animals were on that ark? How could God get millions of creatures on the ark? Remember, there were 8 people, Noah, his 3 sons, and each of their wives, 4 couples on the ark. National Geographic did a study and came to the conclusion all humans come from one of 4 gene pools, by the way. As far as the animals on the ark, remember, he didn't have to bring all 350 types of dogs. He only had to bring 2 that represented the entire canine gene pool. Same with all animals. Dinosaurs, there were 50 kinds of dinosaurs. He only had to bring 2 of each kind. The average size of a dinosaur was the size of a Shetland pony. Some were smaller than chickens. The sauropods, the really big long necks, he only had to bring 2, and they're probably young ones the size of an Indian elephant. Getting these things on the ark, if you bring it down, there's only about 40,000 vertebrate animals. If you take out the 25,000 marine creatures that would not have been on the ark, the amphibians who wouldn't have been on the ark, and the water-dwelling mammals who were not on the ark, because he was only told to bring land dwellers that breathe through their nostrils and some birds, you come down to about 5,000 kinds, 2 of each kind, 2,000 kinds. 2 of each kind's 4,000. Throw in 7 of the clean types. You're looking at around 5,000 animals on the ark, and the average size of a land dweller that breathes through their nostrils is the size of a house cat. So the question really comes down to how did Noah and his family get about 5,000 house cat-sized animals on the ark? So it wasn't an issue. They did well after the flood, but people did gather at Babel. People refused to spread out. Now, right after the flood and the Ice Age, which was a direct result of the flood, and continental drift, which took place because of the flood when the fountains of the deep erupted, and the continent slid apart from where the fountains of the deep had erupted. Any chance you give me some water? Some water? Water, yeah. Man dying here, yes. Anyways, the fountains of the deep heated up the oceans that led to massive evaporation and cloud cover that rained over the equators, pounded snow on the poles, forming the one and only Ice Age. People after the flood and animals, the ocean waters are about 400 feet lower than they are today. Even secular textbooks teach this. Animals spread out, but people gathered at Babel. And they refused to spread out. So God, about 250 years after the flood, during the days of Peleg, he confused languages at Babel and forced people to spread out. So people were confused by languages. They spread out around the globe. And as the Ice Age, as the water slowly cooled down after the flood, and we're probably talking about 500 to 600 years after the flood. Thank you, Barry. You'll be in my will from now on, okay? Oh, much better.
Okay, there are other questions? Yeah, one here.
But anyways, that also, I just want to hang on one second. That's the reason we have different looking people groups today. All made in the image of God. And I see different looking people groups here. We've got more. But people also bring forth people after our kind. But people spread out, and the melting ice caps filled in the ocean. So people were separated by language, islands, nations, etc. They had to marry within the captured gene pools for about 3,000 years, and slight adaptational losses through micro-adaptations took place, leading to the different looking people groups we have. There's only one race, and that's the human race. But we have different looking people. Most of the biggest difference is skin color, etc., just topical things. But that's the reason we have different looking people. We don't have different people groups. We don't have different races. That's an evolutionary term. We all have different people groups, all made in the image of God. That's the reason we do blood transfusions together. We can do kidney transplants together, because we did not evolve to different levels. So there's a lot to what you were asking, and I just want to quickly hit upon some of that.
When Noah got on the ark with the animals, there was a lot left behind. There's a lot of animals that were covered up really rapidly, and there's evidence of that, obviously. But there was also humans that were left behind, a lot of them. But I haven't heard too much about those human fossils. Has there been discoveries of large groups of that too, and around the world?
That's a good question. Human fossils are extremely rare. Mammal fossils are extremely rare. Number one, God said the purpose of the flood was to destroy man. I think what he meant was that the purpose of the flood was to destroy man, and he did. Humans were smart enough to grab onto things and float for a while. Mammal fossils are extremely rare because mammals, when they drown, tend to float and they get destroyed. So human fossils are extremely, extremely rare. Don't misunderstand me. But back in 1972, Richard Leakey found what he called a modern human skull. It was under a layer of rock, but they had already dated the layer of rock 250 million years old. Well, wait a minute. Darwinists only claim humans came about in the last 1.5 to 1.8 million years. So did they admit this refutes Darwinian evolution and the older dating methods and the geologic time scale? No, they just redated the rock from 250 million to 1.8 million. So although they're extremely rare, don't get me wrong, anytime they find any fossil in the wrong layer, if they can get away with it, they'll just redate the rock layer to fit the fossil. As I'll show Saturday when I show the top 10 Darwinian or old Earth frauds, I'll show you how all the dates, radiometric dating, etc., come from the geologic time scale made 220 years ago, based on uniform processes and no global flood, as foretold would happen in 2 Peter 3:3-6. I covered the first part of that, uniformity, tonight. It goes on to say they'll deny the flood. And that's exactly what they do. All dates come from the column. They date the rock layer by the fossils in it, and the fossils by the rock layer. So if they find a human fossil as this one, they'll just redate the whole rock layer to fit the evolutionary story. It would because it would be good regardless, because it is probably the most comprehensive book out there. I've written 9 books, but I just keep combining them into this one. I don't want you to have to read 20 books. I want you to be able to read one book, and I'm more of a businessman, so I'm going to get right to the point, just like I do with the slides, so I can go through a lot of things real fast. And yeah, it would be a good one. I just got this one completed, and the school is going to be redoing their class to have it fit with this book sometime in the next year.
Okay, well, we'll bring this question to an end. You can go to his table after and ask some more questions. And I also want to mention that we have answers books that answer many of these questions in much more detail if you want them. There's answers books on the Apologetics forum tables. So take advantage of that as well. Just to remind you now that, let's see, there's a bunch of flyers on the table still, and if you want to get on our mailing list, there's a sign up there too. Add your name and email to that. And remember, the way we support this ministry and bringing in speakers like Russ here is through free will offerings, and that's there are boxes at the back of the sanctuary there. And if you would rather do it online, we have a donate button. You can add to it there as well and get recognized for tax breaks. So remember, tomorrow we have the mini conference at Cornerstone Bible Church. So you're going to be answering questions